There are moments that stay with you long after they happen. Moments that replay in your mind years later, not because of what did happen, but because of what almost did. For me, that moment happened on a quiet Wednesday night in April of 2015. At the time, I was 16 years old. My girlfriend, my 9-year-old little brother, and I had decided to go see It Follows at a small movie theater near our town. We usually preferred late-night screenings because they were nearly empty. There was something fun about having an entire theater to ourselves, especially for horror movies. I also had Thursdays off that semester, so a Wednesday night movie felt perfect. The weather outside was cool and calm. The parking lot was nearly deserted when we arrived. Only a handful of cars sat scattered beneath the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Inside, the theater felt unusually quiet. The lobby was almost empty. No lines. No crowds. Just the faint smell of popcorn and the distant hum of arcade machines near the entrance. As we walked into our auditorium, I immediately assumed we had the room to ourselves. Then my little brother pointed toward the back. "Someone's up there." I followed his finger. In the far upper left corner of the theater sat a man wearing a dark gray hoodie. He was completely alone. At first, nothing about that seemed unusual. Plenty of people watched movies alone. Still, something about him stood out. Maybe it was the way he sat motionless in the darkness. Maybe it was because the theater was otherwise empty. Or maybe it was simply because horror movies have a way of making ordinary things feel unsettling. We ignored it. Our seats were in the upper middle section. There was a railing in front where we could stretch our legs. We left empty seats between us for extra space. Since my younger brother was with us, we weren't exactly treating it like a date night. I ended up sitting closest to the aisle, closest to the stranger. Within minutes, the previews ended. The lights dimmed. The giant screen became the only source of light in the room. The movie began, and without realizing it, we had already started sharing the theater with someone who would soon become impossible to ignore. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. My little brother immediately pulled out a bag of candy he had secretly brought with him. The loud crinkling of wrappers echoed through the nearly empty theater. "Seriously?" I whispered. "Be quiet." He nodded, and then somehow managed to make even more noise. The movie continued. Characters spoke on screen. Tension slowly built. Then I heard something behind us. A sudden sound. Not loud enough to be alarming. Just noticeable. I waited a few seconds before casually turning around. The man in the gray hoodie had moved. He wasn't in the top corner anymore. Now he was one row lower. I stared for a moment, then turned back around. Maybe he wanted a better view. Maybe the seat was uncomfortable. There were dozens of perfectly reasonable explanations. So I let it go. 5 minutes later, I heard another sound. A faint movement. A shuffle. Again I looked back. Again the man had moved. Another row closer. This time I leaned toward my girlfriend. "Don't look now," I whispered with a nervous laugh. "But that guy keeps moving closer." She barely reacted. Okay. She didn't even bother turning around. The movie continued. I tried focusing on the screen, tried convincing myself I was overthinking everything. But something about it bothered me. The theater was nearly empty. Why keep changing seats? Why keep moving closer? A few more minutes passed. This time I turned around without hearing anything. Pure curiosity. The moment I looked, my stomach tightened. The man had moved again. Not only was he closer, but he wasn't sitting at the edge anymore. He had shifted toward the center, toward us. Now only 3 rows separated him from our seats. I nudged my girlfriend. She finally turned around. The expression on her face changed immediately. Confusion, concern. A silent question. When she looked back at me, she whispered, "Should we move?" No. The answer came out faster than I expected. I didn't want to look scared. I didn't want to admit that the situation was getting under my skin. But the truth was simple. I wasn't watching the movie anymore. I was watching him. Even when I faced forward, I could feel his presence somewhere behind us. The screen flashed bright scenes across the theater. Each burst of light briefly illuminated the rows behind us. And every time it did, I found myself wondering one thing. Would he be closer again? The movie kept playing. People on the screen were running from danger. Meanwhile, a completely different kind of fear was building inside me. I kept arguing with myself. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe he was just moving around. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But every explanation felt weaker than the last. Eventually, I turned around again. The sight instantly froze my thoughts. The man was now only 2 rows behind us, almost directly in line with our seats. Closer than ever, his head was tilted downward. He appeared to be staring into his lap, or maybe staring at nothing. I couldn't tell. The darkness concealed most of his face. The projector's light occasionally flashed across his hoodie, revealing only brief glimpses before plunging him back into shadow. I felt my pulse speeding up. This had gone beyond coincidence. I opened my mouth. I was finally going to say something. Maybe ask what he was doing. Maybe tell him to stop moving closer. Maybe demand an explanation. But no words came out. I was 16, skinny, not exactly intimidated. And what if I was wrong? What if I confronted a completely innocent person and embarrassed myself? That uncertainty kept me silent. For a while, then the movie slowed down during a quieter scene. My little brother stood up. I gotta go to the bathroom. Okay, I said. He disappeared down the aisle. I watched him leave, then returned my attention to the screen. About a minute later, curiosity got the better of me again. I glanced behind us and instantly felt a jolt of panic. The man was gone, not moved, gone. The entire section behind us was empty. I looked from row to row. Nothing. No gray hoodie. No movement. No figure sitting in the darkness. Just empty seats. I told my girlfriend. She immediately smiled with relief. Good. But her reaction triggered a horrifying realization in my mind. If he wasn't behind us anymore, then where was he? My heart started hammering. My thoughts immediately jumped to my brother. The timing was impossible to ignore. The stranger disappeared. My little brother had gone to the bathroom. Suddenly, every instinct I had was screaming the same warning. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Without another word, I stood up and headed for the exit. I told my girlfriend to stay where she was. Then I ran. The theater door burst open and I entered the hallway outside. The contrast was jarring. Inside the auditorium, there had been movie audio and flashing light. Out here, there was almost nothing, just silence. A long, empty hallway stretched before me beneath dim overhead lights. My footsteps echoed loudly against the floor. I scanned the corridor, and then I saw him. The gray hoodie. The man was walking into the men's bathroom. My stomach dropped. I broke into a sprint. Every terrible possibility flooded my mind at once. My little brother was 9 years old, alone, and that man had spent the entire movie slowly moving closer to us. I wasn't willing to ignore that anymore. The hallway suddenly felt endless. Each step seemed to take forever. By the time I reached the bathroom entrance, my heart was pounding so hard it felt painful. I pushed through the door. What I saw inside is something I have never forgotten. The man was on his knees, literally on his knees. He was positioned in front of the stalls, looking underneath the doors, peeking beneath them, searching. For a second, everything froze. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The bathroom felt unnaturally quiet. Then the man turned his head. His eyes met mine. Neither of us said a word. The silence lasted only a moment, but it felt much longer. Then, from somewhere outside the bathroom, I heard a familiar voice. Hey! My head snapped toward the sound. It was my little brother. He was standing farther down the hallway, waving at me with a confused expression, completely unharmed, completely unaware of what had just happened. Relief crashed over me so hard that my knees nearly gave out. At the same time, terror settled even deeper. Because if my brother wasn't in that bathroom, then who had this man been searching for? And what exactly was he planning to do if he found someone alone in one of those stalls? I didn't wait around to find out. I immediately left the bathroom and hurried toward my brother. The stranger remained behind, but the image of him kneeling on that floor stayed burned into my mind. The second I reached my brother, I grabbed him and headed straight back toward the auditorium. My girlfriend could immediately tell something was wrong. I told her we were leaving. Now, no arguments. No finishing the movie. No waiting around. We walked quickly through the nearly empty theater and headed for the front desk. A teenage employee was working near the ticket area. Breathing heavily, I explained everything. The man in the hoodie, the constant seat changes, the disappearing act, the bathroom. The employee listened carefully and immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. Police were called. While we waited, theater staff reviewed security footage. The cameras showed the man walking through the hallway exactly as I had described. Watching that footage made everything feel even more real. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't imagination. The man had actually followed the same path. The officers arrived shortly afterward and took statements from everyone involved. We filed a police report. Questions were asked. Descriptions were given. Details were recorded. But despite all of it, one major question remained unanswered. Who was he? The investigation never produced an answer. No identification, no arrest, no explanation. The man simply vanished from our lives as suddenly as he had appeared in that theater. More than a year passed. Nothing ever came from the case. No updates, no closure, just silence. Looking back, one detail still sends chills through me. My little brother never entered the bathroom where that man was waiting. Instead, he had unknowingly gone to a different restroom farther down the hall, a completely different bathroom. A simple decision, a random choice, the kind of thing nobody thinks about. Yet that small decision may have changed everything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he had walked into the other restroom. Would I have arrived in time? Would the man have approached him? Would anything have happened at all? I'll never know. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, not knowing. Because somewhere out there is a man in a gray hoodie who spent an entire movie slowly moving closer to a family he didn't know, before ending up on his knees inside a bathroom, peering beneath stall doors. And to this day, nobody ever identified him. Nobody ever explained why he was there. And nobody ever found out what he was really looking for. I also had Thursdays off that semester.